This is Red Ice Radio. From the visible to the obscure. redicecreations.com.
Welcome back, Jan. It's good to talk to you once again. How are you and how are things over at gnosticmedia.com?
Things are very good over here, Henrik, and it's been a while. I think it was 2007 when you had me on last. Is that correct, or was it 2008?
Good question. We had you on twice, so maybe it's 2007 first, and then 2008 the second. I have to go back in the archive and take a look at that myself. And obviously, we can encourage all our listeners to go in there to listen to some fascinating material, specifically tied into the entheogenic work that you've been involved in, of course. But here today, Jan, we're going to you've taken things obviously into a new direction with your work and research, and I'm looking forward to talking more about it today. The 7 liberal arts. Let's just run through some of the basics here to start then, Jan.
Well, sure. And for people who want to follow along with many of the things we'll be discussing, they can go to my website, triviumeducation.com. That's TRIVIUM education.com. And most of what we'll be discussing is there on the front page, and then they can follow along with the audio and video and other reading material that's up there as well. And hopefully by the time this interview goes out, we'll have a brand new website up for everyone. So, so basically, when I was writing my first book, Astrotheology and Shamanism, back in 2003, 2004, and into 2005, we covered a large section there on sevens and looking at sevens and religion and mythology and this sort of thing. And one thing that kept coming up that I couldn't figure out how to work my way into it was the 7 liberal arts. And the 7 liberal arts, and we have to remember, or what I should say is, we need to make a distinction that the modern liberal education that people might receive at a university or a college is very rarely, if ever, the traditional 7 liberal arts or classical 7 liberal arts education as it was originally taught, unless one happens to have a teacher or professor who knows the traditional form and is just happens to be teaching the class, which I do hear from professors on occasion that do teach it and do know it, but they are rare. Mm. But the 7 liberal arts, let's start off by defining what the word liberal means first off. And the word liberal is defined as free by birth, hence befitting a free man or gentleman. And then somebody who's studied the liberal arts or liberal education. And it's also not strict or rigorous, not confined or restricted in the literal sense. It means free. So the word liberal is also where we get the word, or it's actually, the word liberal is derived from the word book. And libro or liber is Spanish for book. And Latin for books. So the freedom is in the books. But let me read you a quote here that is from Edward Bernays. That this is actually from the very first page of chapter 1 in Edward Bernays' 1928 book, Propaganda. Mm. And he says, "The conscious and intelligent manipulation of the organized habits and opinions of the masses is an important element in a democratic society. Those who manipulate this unseen mechanism of society constitute an invisible government, which is the true ruling power of our country. We are governed, our minds molded, our tastes formed, our ideas suggested, largely by men we have never heard of. This is a logical result of the way in which our democratic society is organized. Vast numbers of human beings must cooperate in this manner if they are to live together as a smoothly functioning society. In almost every act of our daily lives, whether in the sphere of politics or business, in our social conduct or our ethical thinking, we are dominated by the relatively small number of persons who understand the mental processes and the social patterns of the masses. It is they who pull the wires which control the public mind. And so what we're looking at is basically it's a system that the elites have established through B.F. Skinner, through Edward Bernays, through people like this.
Right, he's patting himself on the back right there in that quote and saying,
right,
look at me, what I've been able to do, basically.
Right, and he's even using propaganda or PR to sell his propaganda to justify his actions, right?
Yeah.
And basically, you know, he says that it's a logical result of the way in which our democratic society is organized. Well, it's only logical because they have to enforce the dumbing down of the rest of us. And I think you've interviewed John Taylor Gatto on your show. Is that correct?
That is correct. Really good interview. Always a lot of fun hearing John Gatto. Yeah.
Right. And, you know, I've had him on my show a number of times as well. And he's just done a weekend with John Taylor Gatto that was recorded on July 4th weekend with Richard Andrew Grove at Tragedy and Hope, who is a partner of mine. And so, you know, he lays out really the dumbing down and how they're dumbing down the public mind through the education. So what Edward Bernays is really saying, and let me give you another quote here by Walter Lippmann. And Walter Lippmann, this is from his Public Opinion, which was published in 1922. We have learned to call this propaganda, a group of men who can prevent independent access to the event, can arrange the news to suit their purpose. In order to conduct a propaganda campaign, there must be some barrier between the public and the event. Access to the real environment must be limited before anyone can create a pseudo-environment he thinks wise or desirable. So what they're doing is they're manipulating the data that's being given to us. So, and in order to do this propaganda, this PR, as well as the marketing, the government systems that are out there today, they had to take something away from us, or at least covet or occult something from us, so that we could not see how all of this works. It's basically, in a way, what we're going to be discussing today is like taking the red pill and being able to see all of the lies coming down the screen like in the Matrix films, okay? And this is the 7 liberal arts education as it was traditionally taught. And as I said, the 7 liberal arts, the word liberal comes from freedom. And they've even spun the word liberal into its antithesis, meaning a tax and spend liberal or a communist or a socialist, which these are actually the antithesis of somebody who would be considered a liberal. You're not, a true liberal isn't somebody who wants to live off the tit of the government. They want to live on their own, right?
That's right. That's right. I wanted to ask you what you think happened to, I'm sure we'll get into it as well, but I want to ask you what you think happened to the teaching of the 7 liberal arts, because this to me then seems that this is a system that was derived for the elite pretty much in that sense, but this has now even that has gone underground, if you know what I mean, Jan, and what we've been given consequently the few 100 years after this disappearance is a much more boiled down version of this. Basically, it's been trimmed to fit the plebes, if you will. But go ahead, Jan.
Sure. Well, the 7 liberal arts is composed of 2 components called the Trivium and the Quadrivium. The Quadrivium was developed by Pythagoras, which he lived about 28 to 2,700 years ago or more, and the Trivium was largely created by Aristotle, who lived about 2,500 years ago. Now, Aristotle, when he published his work on the Trivium and on logic, Aristotle was Alexander the Great's mentor. And he got in trouble with Alexander the Great for publishing this information because it showed how the elites controlled the masses. And, so really what we're looking at is a system. It's sort of like, a lot of people know that the Kabbalah can be used for mind control and for negative purposes. But what we're looking at here is the same can also be true for the Trivium. And the only way that these systems can be used for mind control against you is by you deciding not to understand how they can be used against you. You have to maintain your own ignorance, or you have to choose to ignore the information, which is where the word ignorance comes from. And the word occult means simply hidden, and the word and educate actually means to unoccult. So when you get educated in something, you're no longer in the dark about it. You're no longer unaware or ignorant about it. And so these systems like the Kabbalah and like the Trivium, the only way that they can really be used against you, I mean, even if you're aware of them, somebody might try, but you're a lot more likely to pick up on any attempt at these things being used against you if you've studied them and you're aware of them than if you're completely ignorant of them and you choose entirely not to study them. This is why they're called the liberal arts, which means of or befitting the free. Okay, so to not know them is basically slavery or servitude. And so this is why it's important to study this stuff. And so what they've done, like I said, they've twisted the word liberal. They've also twisted the word trivium, and they've tried to trivialize the word trivium and its importance. And in fact, even I looked up on the Encyclopedia Britannica's website, and they had a wrong definition on their own website. So I contacted one of the academics, one of the professor editors at the Encyclopedia Britannica, and I asked him about it, and he says, "Oh, that's completely false. Where did you ever get the idea that the trivium came from the word trivial came from the word trivium? The word trivium means three roads crossing in Latin, and the word trivial derives from this other word." And I said, "Well, that's exactly my point, sir, because I got that from your publication." And so he wasn't even aware that the Encyclopedia Britannica was misrepresenting trivium and trivial. So let's get into what the trivium is. And the trivium is composed of three components, which is the first one is, and let me just switch what's on my screen here. The first one is grammar, and grammar is actually knowledge. And grammar, there are two different types of grammar that, as we can see it. Most people, when they hear the word grammar, they would think, Henrik, why the heck are you having someone on your show to give us a lesson about grammar? Okay, so, there's two different types of grammar. There's grammar that relates to a specified language like English, Russian, or Latin, and the words and sentence structure and everything within that language. And then there's general grammar, which relates to the words of objective reality in any language and applies to all subjects as the first set of building blocks to an integrated or fully mindful objective study or body of knowledge. So basically, we can think of general grammar as doing research, okay? And what general grammar does is it answers the question of who, what, where, and when, okay? And special grammar applies to, again, the punctuation and grammar and understanding that the letters and things that you're dealing with and how to put them together properly. Okay, so when we are looking into a subject, the first thing we have to, the first things that we need to know are who, what, where, and when. Otherwise, we don't have any knowledge about what's going on. If I came up to you, Henrik, and I said, Henrik, why does that machine over there work? And if you haven't gone over and looked at it and studied it, you probably wouldn't have any who, what, where, when, or et cetera of how this thing works.
Right.
And you wouldn't be able to explain that to somebody else. So it's important that we always, before coming to conclusions, and this is one of the main issues that I see as a global problem today everywhere, is people coming to conclusions before they've asked who, what, where, and when. And this is known as putting your logic first. And so this is actually, I think, part of the removal of the trivium from education. And you asked earlier when it came out of our education. I think it came out about in the 1850s is when they started to remove it. And probably by the 1920s in the United States, it had been effectively removed except in small pockets. And some people even attribute the American Revolution and the American Industrial Age to the trivium and the teaching of the trivium in the old single-room schoolhouses. So This is all sort of integrated and put in together. But
we can understand, John, that it's a dangerous thing. In other words, this education, the knowledge that is acquired through the, if you will, then the proper understanding of the world, your surrounding, and so forth. That becomes you get an empowered population because of it, and that from their point of view
exactly the key. Yeah. That's exactly the key, is you're empowering them, which enables the public to see the stuff that Edward Bernays and Walter Lippmann and B.F. Skinner were talking about. B.F. Skinner said, "Give me a child and I'll shape him into anything." Right.
See that. So just one more point on that, Jon, because I think that's a really important point. That means, in other words, as well, that they are not in any regard better or superior if we look at the elite or those who have enslaved humanity.
You just hit it exactly on the head. What they're trying to do is they're trying to play this whole genetic eugenicist. You can even throw Zionist philosophy in there, and trying to say that one group is above all of the others. But what they're really doing is they're using a specific way of thinking to have an edge up on other people. And by you having this system, you can see how they're attempting to manipulate you.
That's right.
Okay. So you exactly hit it on the head. So what happens when people don't understand the trivium, or even if you get the trivium out of order, the trivium, some people will teach the trivium as grammar, logic, and rhetoric as three distinct and separate courses of study. And myself and the people that I work with, we completely disagree with that. We see it as a functioning system. And the reason that it's a functioning system is when you put it always in order, grammar, logic, rhetoric, it functions as a wheel or a sort of corkscrew so that you can go up and down levels in research to verify and recheck the data that you're dealing with. You're going, when somebody asks at you how, you go back and you look through logic of the why, which forces you to go back down into the grammar of the who, what, where, and when before you come back up with more data. So it's like this system, like a corkscrew, that enables you to go up and down into any subject matter, whether you're studying basket weaving or astronomy. And or you want to be a chef or whatever you're looking to do, you can use that same information to dig down, get to the foundations of what you're attempting to do, and come back up. And, with the proper information. So what happens is when we fail to do that, it's known as putting your logic before your grammar. And logic is understanding. Okay. And logic answers the why of a subject, but without knowing what you're talking about first, and grammar is knowledge without knowing who, what, where, and when first, exactly what are you understanding, right? So see, just by asking what are you understanding, that forces you to go back down to grammar and ask who, what, where, and when, right? So a lot of people, if you make a statement about something, they'll say, "Oh, Henrik, you're just a conspiracy theorist. The government could never do that." Rather, and you're sitting there holding this stack of data for them to go through, and they refuse to look at it. They're putting their logic first. They've already made up their minds. Don't, as the old saying goes, don't confuse me with facts. I've already made up my mind, right?
That's right.
So what they're doing is they're putting their logic or their decision first, their why something is, before they've ever asked who, what, where, and when, and looked at the actual data. Okay. So then what happens then is people who don't go back down to that level of grammar and look at the who, what, where, when, and then come up before they ask why. And let me add that logic is developing the faculty of reason and establishing non-contradictory relationships, and it reveals a systematic understanding of the items that you're dealing with. And it's a guide for thinking correctly, for thinking without contradiction. It's so, as Ayn Rand defined it, it is the art of non-contradictory identification. And interestingly, Ayn Rand was one, if you read her book, she was one that very commonly put logic before grammar. She would come to conclusions that were wrong. Like if you study Anthony Sutton or Carol Quigley or Douglas Reed or some of these types of works, you'll clearly see right away that she didn't put her grammar before her logic. She came to conclusions before proper study. It doesn't mean that all of Ayn Rand's philosophy is bad. It just means that she didn't have a proper understanding of the trivium and how to gather data before coming to a conclusion.
Jan, do you see that there is a problematic aspect here, though, if we incorporate philosophy into this? Because at a certain point there, if you are into certain philosophical areas, so to speak, there will be contradictory things.
Right. Well, see, here's the issue, Henrik, is the ancients believed, post Aristotle anyway, that you couldn't even study philosophy if you didn't already have a foundation in the trivium. See, what a lot of people don't know, and maybe this is a good segue here, what a lot of people don't know is that there's this ancient conversation going on since Socrates all the way to the present called the Great Conversation. And it's found in the great books of the Western world. And it's the great books of the Western world is 54 or 60 volumes now up to the present day. And they're getting harder and harder to get copies of, but you can go to used bookstores sometimes and find them for I don't know what it would be in Sweden, but equivalent of $100, $200. But this is just about all of the major philosophers of the last 2,500 years, and it's a continuing conversation that each generation builds on the last. And to really even be able to get in and understand the great conversation, you first have to have studied the trivium and quadrivium. So, this is one of the ways that they keep people out of understanding how everything is being done to them, and where the contradictions come in that you mentioned. And I like to jab at Kant, because I think that Kant gave us the contradictions. And it's Kant's philosophies that have really had the biggest detriment on us, and the irrationality of the New World Order and many of the other things that are being pushed upon the people today, as well as I think the positivist movement is largely from Kant. It's people who instead of taking action against a wrong, they'll say, oh, well, that's negative. I don't want to hear about it. I don't want to know about it. See, they're choosing ignorance rather than understanding. They automatically block out information. And I've heard many hippie type people who will say that something is negative and they'll refuse to check it out. They'll choose ignorance. And I think it's to their own and everyone else's detriment, because who does that decision work for? Does it work in your favor or the elitist New World Order's favor for you to sit there and not take action when you see injustice?
Yeah, well,
right. If you're gonna, if somebody, like, let's say there are three people and they're in a race and they're at the starting line. Okay. And one of them is a positive thinker. One is neither positive nor negative. And the other one is very negative. Which one do you think would win the race?
Jesus, does it even matter? That's a difficult one, actually.
Well, see, it's what I'm getting at is it's about taking action and not. See, the joke is that the positive thinker would get upset about the negative thinker being there and sit down and meditate to clear the air. The negative thinker, while he might be negative and bitch and moan and complain the whole time, he's going to get to the finish line, and he's probably going to tie about the same time with the one who's not positive or negative, who was stopping and smelling the flowers along the way. So it shows you that typically people who only want to be positive, they're not being holistic or critical thinkers, and people often see critical thinking as being negative. Okay.
Yeah, that's true.
But what positive thinking is out of balance. If you're positive all the time, you're not being balanced. And if you look at the Kabbalah, one of the ways that in the Kabbalah that mind control can be used is to group you into one of the Sephira where you would only be thinking positively. And so you need to remember that you have all of these sides. There's a yin and a yang in balance in nature. There's day and night. There's good and bad. There's a balance to the nature in the universe. So if we're always only focusing on one side and refusing to absolutely look at the other under any circumstance, then we can actually very easily be controlled and manipulated through that.
Absolutely. It's also what I see, obviously, that this is also about what kind of information or the data, if you will, then that you get access to. In order to make the proper judgment or decision. I don't know if this is jumping ahead, Jan, but if we just briefly look into that idea, that you must be able to have all the variables, if you will, within your parameters to make the proper decision, much in the same way that many of these people, they want to, this has nothing to do with empirical data, if you will. They're actually not truly observing reality the way it is. I mean, and this goes back then to Rand's, if you will, objectivism.
Right.
That, I mean, how can we be truly objective in a world where we possibly cannot know all the variables? We cannot know all the truth, right?
Well, see, that's the thing is and that's correct in a way, but what the Trivium does, and when it's put in a functioning system, in a wheel or in a corkscrew type fashion, always going around, it always teaches you to go back down and look at the data, and you can actually dig down through the information coming in via the five senses. You can dig down and you can find all of the available data on a particular subject. And you can decide with that available data, you can decide if you have reached a final conclusion, A or B, yes or no, or if you need to do more research, or if it's true or false, etc.
Right.
So, and even if you've come to a conclusion at that particular point in history, and if a statement is true or false, by using the Trivium as a functioning system, you always know to go back and check things if new data ever comes in. Right. So then you're always able to go back, and you have a functioning method to go back and look on, and you know exactly how you derived that conclusion the last time you went through it. So then you can very quickly and easily go back and look at it. And doing so is sort of like it's a mental antivirus system, because that way, you get these chain emails where people send you out something ridiculous, and send it on to 20 other people or whatever, or there's the spider on the toilet seat is going to bite you, and a lot of people don't go to snoops.com or one of these websites to check and see if the chain email that they're spreading around is true or not. And what happens is, if you, for instance, let's say it takes you 30 seconds or maybe 5 minutes to go on Snoops or go online and verify if this chain email is correct or not before you send it on, right? But let's say if you don't verify it and you just send it on and you send it out to 100 people, you've just taken up all of those people's time, multiplied many times over, simply because you didn't verify that information. And if you send out false information, it's like you're sending out a virus. You're sending out bad information to other people. And what happens to your computer when it gets a virus on it? If somebody doesn't have an antivirus software on their computer, and they get an email from somebody with a virus, and it goes into their email box, and it sends out another several hundred emails and infects all of those people downstream, just because that one person without the antivirus isn't checking that data, now all of those other people out there have this virus. And we see this every few years. There'll be a global computer virus that takes out companies and emails and all of this stuff because people passed on information that they didn't verify. We're looking at a macro and a micro. We're looking at two different things here, computer systems and humans. But I think the analogy is clear that when people themselves don't take a minute or two to verify that information, the time that's taken up downstream is many-fold greater. Okay. So, take the time to verify information before you pass it on. Ask who, what, where, and when. And that way, you are coming to a position of certainty. You either know for certain that you need to do more research. It's either A or B. I need to do more research to find out. Or by using logic and logical fallacies and understanding sentence structure and all of this, you can see if if one side is using fallacies and isn't substantiating their facts and is making fallacious claims, then you can dismiss it, right? And you can figure out which person is making the better argument, which we haven't really gone into yet. But so anyway, the third part of the Trivium is rhetoric, and it is the how of a subject. So before you can go to other people and explain how something works properly, you have to have answered the why and the who, what, where, and when. You've had to have done your grammar and logic. First, you've gathered all of the data with the grammar, and you've removed the contradictions with the logic, and you've answered why something works the way it does. Now, when somebody asks you how, you're able to express that cogently and clearly and pass on clear information without noise in the signal. And so this is what is lacking in our education systems today, which people very definitely had. You know, I've read letters from soldiers in the American Civil War that were far more articulate than your average person today that you would even meet online or anywhere. And
especially online, Jan, we know that.
yeah.
The internet lingo and everything is boiled down, and it's Orwell's, nightmare unfolding here, basically, in terms of our vocabulary, you know.
Absolutely. You just hit that one on the head too. And in fact, I have a book sitting around here somewhere that's on that very subject. It's called Less Than Words Can Say. That's on this very subject and the constant dumbing down of language. So, you know, and I mentioned logical fallacies a minute ago. We should probably cover some of the logical fallacies, and people need to understand the logical fallacies, I think, first, because you can begin to apply them right away. And the logical fallacies is really how you can knowing the logical fallacies is like taking the red pill in the Matrix. That's the best analogy, I think. And there's two types or two categories of logical fallacies. There's formal and informal. And formal fallacies are based strictly on the logical formation of an argument, which is deductive. Informal fallacies are the most commonly recognized and easiest to learn, and they take into account non-logical content of an argument, or inductive, and are false for epistemological, dialectical, or pragmatic reasons. And the informal fallacies fall under three categories, which are relevance, presumption, and ambiguity. And so when we understand the logical fallacies, and I should mention that the word fallacy comes from the Latin fallare, which means to lie. And so when people use these different types of fallacies, they are in fact lying. And there's two different types of people who use fallacies. There are your average person who's never studied logic or any of this type of thing, and they're just doing it ignorantly. They're not aware of it, and they're not educated. And then there's the other type who does this stuff intentionally. They're the sophists. This is where we get the word sophisticated from. And so these are typically the elites, the lawyers, the marketers, the propagandists, the politicians, these type of people. They're the sophisticated class, the sophists, and they're using this type of information to control the rest of society. And so we can go into some of the logical fallacies now.
I want to ask you, before we go there, Jan, a little bit about the right type of information again. If we go back to that idea of, because if we're thinking about this idea of the circle or the spiral that you mentioned, that we can go around in this idea of, okay, do I need to collect more data or more research in order to find out what actually is going on about whatever subject, basically. There is a potentiality there that we might end up, obviously, in one way, running in a circle. We could also be put down by the idea of... Oh, go ahead, Jan.
I don't agree with that you would be left just going in a circle, because, the idea of doing that in and of itself is always self-corrective. I think that not doing it is what gets us in a circle in the first place, because we're not asking who, what, where, and when. We haven't checked our data, and we jump to false conclusions without any information or proper study. And I think that the going in the circle bit is exactly what our entire society is doing right now without the Trivium. So I would completely beg to differ with you on that, because always going back to the ground level and checking yourself and making sure that you're making your decisions on solid information is what's going to give you strong self-esteem and strong knowledge that you're making the right decision. So
I see what you mean, Jan, definitely. I guess what I'm alluding to then, in one sense of all of this, is the quality of the information that we are getting. Let's say, for instance, that we want to find out something about the Celts or the Druids, then let's say.
Sure.
And if the only data that we can assess comes from, Julius Caesar, because it's the only one that is actually written down by, and
well,
this
you're limited to the information available that you can bring in via the five senses.
Right.
So, so obviously, if you knew that, well, Julius Caesar is the only source, or, do I have to go out and dig in the field and do my own archaeology work to find out more who, what, where, and when, then that's what I have to do. You can understand that this one source based on logical fallacies, and we're just about to go into the logical fallacies, but if one side is making a biased argument against the other, the logical fallacies and knowing how sentences are put together and if a statement is logical or if someone is attempting to use these fallacies against you, 99 times out of 100, it will reveal those false attempts just in the nature of using logic itself.
I see. Okay. Well, that's interesting then, because that's kind of the nature of what I wanted to get to. Like, basically, how far does it take you in terms of, are you only limited within the field of academia, meaning you're an armchair researcher, or does it actually take you out into the physical world as well?
Well, no, see, because remember that the general grammar aspect deals with reality, with, trees, plants, animals, cars, roads, houses, buildings, books, anything that's out there in reality can fall under general grammar, whereas special grammar deals with the building blocks of a specialized language like English or Russian or Latin, okay? Mm-hmm. So the general grammar always takes you back out into what's out in reality to look at what's there and to go, okay, this is what I need to do to gather more information before I go back in and derive a final conclusion.
Excellent. Okay. Individual assessment of the situation, in other words, and not relying on the data that is available necessarily only.
Right, exactly. So it's always, you're always saying, okay, what was this person's background? Where did he come from? Did he have an agenda? Who was he working for? Is he using false rhetoric in here? Is the information that he provides, or she, well cited? And are those sources easy to find? Are those sources verifiable? Are they misquoted, etc.? So you can go back in and check out all of that, and in fact, this is exactly what I did when I wrote my last book, The Holy Mushroom, when I was on your show last time, with all of the attacks that were used against John Allegro, primarily by R. Gordon Wasson. And so what I did is I was actually the first in 40 years since Allegro published that book to actually check each one of his footnotes and then go get the citation that he used in that footnote and verify it, put them all together, and go straight down the line and see if his citations checked out, which in fact they did, contrary to every scholar's opinion out there for the last 40 years, right? And then on top of that, I was also able to find ancient primary texts that substantiated. One of the texts specifically mentioned the quote-unquote holy mushroom. So here we had an ancient primary text specifically backing up Allegro's thesis, and today we also have about 3,000 other images and things like that in 1970 we didn't have the internet and there was only one or two, right? So, so this is how we can go back down and dig down and not take one person or one group's opinion. And going into that, we can begin by looking at the informal logical fallacies. And like I said, there's three different groups of them, being relevance, presumption, and ambiguity, that they primarily fall under. And so I'm just going to go down the list of some of these first, and then we'll focus on a few of them. But ad hominem, appeal to authority, appeal to belief, appeal to consequences of a belief, appeal to emotion, appeal to fear, appeal to flattery, appeal to novelty, appeal to pity, to popularity, to ridicule, to spite, to tradition. Then there's the bandwagon fallacy. There's begging the question or circular reasoning. There's the bias sample. There's burden of proof, circumstantial ad hominem, confusing cause and effect, false dilemma, gambler's fallacy, the genetic fallacy. There's guilt by association, hasty generalization, the middle ground fallacy. And this is only a small listing of them. There's actually a couple of hundred out there that are known, and the list will never be complete because people can always think of new lies.
That's right.
And ways to lie.
Well,
but,
I mean, the conspiracy movement would do good to examine some of these points.
Absolutely. And that's the whole idea of getting this information out there, is because if the conspiracy movement can go through all of this and learn how these lies work, they'll be able to go back through and filter out all of the misinformation and disinformation that's out there against the so-called truth movement. And they'll be able to refine the argument, refine the data about 9/11 or about any other subject, and get more hardcore facts, filter out what's false. When someone when Jason Burmis and Dylan Avery went on Popular Mechanics, or went up against Popular Mechanics on Democracy Now! Several years ago, if they had been armed with this information when they went up there, instead of throwing logical fallacies back at the Popular Mechanics guys, they would have been able to say, oh, well, that was a slippery slope, or that was a straw man, or that was a red herring argument, or you're using an appeal to fear, that was an appeal to ridicule. If you can't make an argument here on national television without using logical fallacies, then that tells me and everyone else that you're intellectually bankrupt, Mr. Popular Mechanics. And that's how it should have gone down.
Yeah.
Okay. So, but we can't, all we can say is coulda, shoulda, woulda, and move forward from here. And this is what needs to be done. People need to learn and study how these things work so that they can go back in and make a solid argument and present this stuff. And whenever, somebody says, Henrik, you're just a conspiracy theorist, ha, 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 ha. That's an ad hominem, number one, conspiracy theorist, because rather than looking at the data you're presenting, they're attacking you. Number two, it's an appeal to ridicule. An appeal to ridicule is a really interesting one, because an appeal to ridicule is just, Henrik, you're wrong because, ha, 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 ha.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's the whole argument.
That's all they got right there. Yeah.
That's all they've got right there. So when you can spot this type of lie, it makes it a lot easier for you. So now when you go through life, and at first when you start learning the fallacies, you'll be doing a lot of stumbling and things, and it's like learning how to walk. A child doesn't get up and run on the first day. They fall a lot. So, for the first year and a half, you need to study like a fallacy a day. And in fact, somebody just started the fallacyadaday.com website, I think it is, to help fill this need. And, but you can study a fallacy a day, or you can, get out there and learn all of the different logical fallacies. And once you get to know the names of the fallacies and how they work, what it's doing is it's taking your knowledge from implicit knowledge to explicit knowledge. So implicit knowledge is like you go to some guy at the swap meet or a car dealership, and you get that funny feeling in your stomach that, that guy I think that guy's lying to me, but I'm not quite sure. I get this funny feeling. Whereas explicit knowledge, you say, oh, well, he just used an appeal to flattery, an appeal to popularity. He said, oh, I'm going to have all the hot chicks if I get the leather seats, and uses all of this misleading vividness and all of this stuff to sell me this product. So now you're not left with just this funny feeling. You're able to identify explicitly the exact lie that was just used against you.
It's a method to verify your intuition and your hunch, something that obviously your unconscious picks up on all the time, right?
You just hit it on the head again, and that's exactly right, because all the implicit knowledge should do is trigger you to go, aha, what was that? Let's turn on the Trivium and let's run this through grammar logic before we come to any conclusions or pass any information on. Let's process this through the Trivium and then see what's going on here. So the implicit, or that intuitive, funny feeling aha moment, should only be a trigger to turn on a systematic method of verification. It shouldn't be the final conclusion.
Right.
Like I see many people in the New Age movement that they'll get a funny feeling. Oh, one day and I've been to plenty of New Age conferences where there's dozens of these people where they think, oh, well, I'm a channeler, and therefore I had a funny feeling. I got this channeled information, and therefore I know it's true. This person is a lizard or an alien because my parents got a funny feeling when they were watching TV. Really? That's all you have to go on?
Well, at that point,
Really?
you're in the realm of an area that can't be proven or disproven either, which is a comfortable place to be for some, obviously.
Well,
right?
no, it's not, because then it's called arguing the arbitrary, and it's automatically dismissed. You're arguing for something that you have no evidence for whatsoever. See, you have to remember, going back to objective reality, that you're bringing in information through your five senses, and you're verifying it. You're asking who, what, where, when, and when before you say why or how. So somebody who is just getting a funny feeling and then takes that as fact, well, Rene Descartes was criticized a lot for that. Kant was criticized a lot for that. Just coming up with ideas and thinking that they reflect reality, when in fact you have no verification of that. So if somebody says, well, Donald Rumsfeld is a lizard, my friend had a funny feeling, or something like that, you need to, be able to verify through the five senses, ask who, what, where, and when, ask if there is some Alison Bailey Fabian socialist agenda for getting you to believe that theory. Okay.
Does it, to you, John, exclude all the metaphysics, if you will, the paranormal?
Well, no, you don't exclude it all. See, what's interesting is the trivium and quadrivium. The third part, and I haven't really discussed the quadrivium yet, but interestingly, the trivium and quadrivium will plug right into sacred geometry and into the Kabbalah, into philosophy and things like this. But what it does, and into the Kabbalah obviously ties into tarot, obviously ties into astrology and all of these different things. But what it does is it gives you a systematic method for understanding how the ancients came up with these ideas and how they do work. And what you understand is that while it gives you an image of yourself, you don't have to base every single aspect as fact. And, what these things should do is give you a hint or a clue to go out and verify as much as possible that information is real before you pass it on to someone else.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Responsibility right there, but before you...
before you pass that mental virus on down the line, we're going back to that the mental virus, and the Trivium being an mental antivirus system and always checking that data. And the New Age movement, the positivist movement, I think that they're the most guilty of this type of behavior and quote unquote thinking. They're not verifying the information. They're just spreading it out there. And that can be very detrimental to everyone downstream that we're actually trying to help up and empower. So, and what the Trivium does is the Trivium is really, there are all these different issues out there that we need to focus on. And, I've been an activist for more than 20 years. And what I realized one day several years ago was that I was figuratively whacking at the branches on all of these different subjects. And so what I started looking for was a root cause of all of this that could be focused on. And, by focusing on the root, it would resolve the other issues. And the Trivium and quadrivium are just that. When you empower someone else with the ability to spot logical fallacies when politicians or anyone else is feeding you bunk, or in a book or in a newspaper or anywhere else, when you empower those people to see all of this stuff, then we're correcting all of that out of the system. We're eliminating all of that noise that is used to corrupt and control us. And
Jan, I mean that's a really good point, I think, as well, because if we think about the fruits from the YouTube tree, right, with all the comments and all these the open source idea with all the now violence that is going on in terms of so-called debating with people back and forth. It's not really debating, of course. It's not a academic discussion that is going on. This is just people throwing crap at each other, basically.
Well, this is due specifically to the dumbing down of the global population. People don't have critical thinking, so they'll sit there and throw ad hominem attacks at each other. You're a fag, or you're an idiot, or you're stupid, or this or that, and all of this nonsense. When, instead of digging back down, looking at the information and coming back up and having a valid logical conclusion. So when you go onto YouTube and start debating someone and they start throwing logical fallacies at you, point out their logical fallacies instead, right?
Yeah.
And so what we're doing is we're creating a meme of people who understand and who can see through the matrix, right? They can see through all of those lies.
So actually, and eventually when this is that idea is adopted enough, you don't even have to point that out, but people will spot it right away. And that's the ultimate advantage of something like this, because I always been very, very disappointed at that, Jan, just the idea of there's never any constructive criticism. Like, okay, I think you're wrong because of this, and that, and break it down and explain and why this is wrong and link up and reference and actually make something out of it so we can progress all of us forward and actually get to the truth. But that is never the issue. That is never the idea here.
See, and hopefully by having this conversation today, you will empower your audience to, from now on, at least many in your audience, to provide that type of constructive critical feedback rather than, the positive thinker who doesn't want to think about it at all or do anything at all, and somebody else will take care of it. Or, somebody who is just going to attack you because they put their logic before their grammar and they haven't done any research, and they're just going to say that, you're full of crap, blah, 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 blah. And that's, again, that is a systematic, it's really a serious disease or illness in our society when people put their logic before their grammar. And this is because people have been, in the last 30 or 40 years especially, been taught to go on their emotions rather than figuring things out. And again, this goes back to Kant, it goes back to Rene Descartes and these guys. But when you just go on those warm, fuzzy feelings and you don't go out and check what, the information that you're passing on, it doesn't matter if it's positive or negative. If you just have that warm, fuzzy feeling that you think you just channeled without verifying that information, and you pass that information on to others that, you think this person is an alien or whatever because their parents saw someone on TV, which is, one of the presenters, out in Philadelphia recently where I presented, that was their evidence for their entire presentation was that their parents had a funny feeling when watching TV. And some of these others, that were there presenting, I know some of them one of them was a Fulbright scholar with a degree, a doctor's degree in law, and I know was fully equipped in the tools of rhetoric and the logical fallacies, which would make him a sophist or incompetent if he had managed to become a Fulbright scholar and not understand these things. So, it's frightening to me that even people that consider themselves educated could go out and spread so much disinformation. And then it comes down to two things. Again, if somebody is doing it intentionally, they're a sophist, they're a sophisticated, they're out there, they're either being paid to do it or they have an agenda to protect. And the other group are those who are simply uneducated and doing it out of pure ignorance. And at that point, you have to ask them, are you familiar with the logical fallacies and things like that? And if they say yes, then they're a sophist, right? So, or if they're not a sophist, they don't have good critical thinking skills. They've got their logic and grammar out of order. They don't go back down and ask who, what, where, and when before they come up with a conclusion. So this is very common, but why don't we go back into some of these fallacies real quick so that, I'd really like to give your audience a firm understanding of a lot of these. Ad hominem I mentioned earlier, and that's just attacking the man. And this website is delaying here. And person A makes claim X. Person B makes an attack on person A. Therefore, A's claim is false. So you make a claim about, I don't know, whatever it may be. Let's say, the bombing in Norway, and you make a claim about it, and somebody says, Henrik, well, you're Swedish. You couldn't know anything about Norway. That's a type of that, so anything that you say about Norway is false. That's an ad hominem, or that could also be considered a circumstantial ad hominem attack, because you're not Norwegian. But they might say, oh, well, Henrik, you're a conspiracy theorist, or Henrik, you're gay, or Henrik, you're this or that, rather than dealing with the specific information that you're providing. An appeal to belief is a very common one. Most people believe that claim X is true, therefore that claim is true. A million people can't be wrong. A million Frenchmen can't be wrong.
That's right. And that's back to that idea of information or disinformation, that if they also just manage to kind of flood not only the web but also books and so forth as well with a certain type of information, this will be considered to be, oh, that's your cross-referencing right there, but that doesn't make it so. It doesn't make it right.
Right. And so, see, going back to that quote that I read from Edward Bernays at the start of the interview, what that means is that just being able to read is not enough. See, Leo Tolstoy said that the printing press is a mighty engine for disseminating ignorance. Now, why would that be? See, if you don't have a systematic method for going through and verifying the data that you're getting when you're reading, then you can be very easily misled. Okay, so that is the whole trick of how this thing works and how they use the media, the press, books, things like that for mind control. So unless you have a systematic method to go through and ask who, what, where, why, when, how, this whole systematic corkscrew type method, then it's very easily to mislead you or control you. But by having this system, you're always able to go back in and check that data and make sure someone's not fooling you. And let me read you this quote also from Sir Thomas More, which is up on the Trivium education website. And he says, "For if you, the rulers, suffer your people to be ill-educated and their manners to be corrupted from their infancy, and then punish them for these crimes to which their first education disposed them, what else can be concluded from this, but that you first make thieves and outlaws and then punish them?" And that's from Sir Thomas More's book Utopia, from I think the early 16th century, from roughly the 1520s or 1530s. So, what we're looking here is people, by not having this systematic method, they are creating the criminals and the outlaws of these people who don't have this ability, and then they blame them for not having the critical thinking. And they blame them for the elites will say, the stupid, ignorant masses, or the proles, the proletariat, the dead, the profane, all of these words. This is all based on people not first and foremost having the trivium, but also the quadrivium on top of that, and then having a understanding of philosophy, especially at least some of the foundation of the great books of the Western world. So let's get into, there's appeal to novelty. Terence McKenna was famous for this.
You think?
X is new, therefore X is correct or better. And, his whole time wave zero theory is based on novelty being better. But we see novelty, nature doesn't really, as far as we can tell, unless you're a hardcore believer in Darwinian theory, which I think, there's certain things that I think it's used more for eugenics than is verifiable. But I don't think that nature always does go for novelty. I think typically humans do, especially with technology, but that's a different matter. And then there's appeal to fear. Obama well, this is one of Obama's favorites. His is also appeal to emotion fallacy, but position Y is presented a claim that is intended to produce fear. Therefore, the claim X is true, a claim that is generally but need not be related to Y in some matter. And so, the Al Qaeda, they're lurking in the caves in terrorist cells, ready to take down America at any moment, even though they're on the other side of the planet, and we're the one who empowered and put Al Qaeda in power. The U.S. government did to fight the Soviet Union, who was also a dialectic, etc.
Yeah.
So we can go on down the line here on how we can use this stuff to find more information. Appeal to ridicule, I already covered. You're wrong because ha 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 ha. And appeal to spite, appeal to tradition. Bias sample is pretty obvious. Sample S, which is biased, is taken from population P. Conclusion is C is drawn about population P based on S. So you're not bringing in enough information in. Guilt by association is another common one. You know what? Let me cover real quick here. Begging the question. Now, begging the question is a very common one that Christians like to use. First, the premises on which the truth of the conclusion is claimed, or the truth of the conclusion is assumed, either directly or indirectly, is the same source. So you're saying, like, let's say, God wrote the Bible. Well, how do you know God wrote the Bible?
Because it's in the Bible.
Well, it says right here in the Bible. Yeah. Well, this is circular reasoning. It's begging the question. Well, how do you know that some rabbi, 2,000 years ago, for his own self-interest or his tribes or people's self-interest, didn't put that in there, such as the Israel belongs to the quote unquote chosen people, which is a racist notion in and of itself. It dehumanizes one group and sets one group above the others. And then they can use this circular logic or this begging the question to fight and take this land and do all of this Zionist stuff, dehumanizing each other and, fighting and bringing in the New World Order type junk. So, this is, all based on begging the question and these logical fallacies. So, next time you get into some debate with a Zionist, you can just point out, that's a begging the question fallacy. That's not a valid argument. And the discussion is done, right? And if the person doesn't want to understand it, and this is kind of a funny statement, but then you just leave them to Jesus.
Yeah, well, that's all you have to do at that point. I mean, exactly. You reach a certain level where you can't assume that those you're arguing with, that they have the same ideas about rationality, or even that they have an ability of being rational. You know what I mean? So
right. Well, see, if they haven't specifically studied and installed in their own mind a systematic form of critical thinking, they probably don't have one. Most people react emotionally to information rather than verifying information first.
Yeah.
So, it's always important to go back down and ask who, what, where, when, before you can answer why in logic and before you can explain how to others in rhetoric. So it's always based on the same issue being wrong, people jumping to conclusions or reacting emotionally before they've checked their data. See, like I'm holding this glass of water here that I just picked up off the table. I can look at the glass of water. I can tap the glass of water. I can lick the glass of water. I can smell the water in there. I can get a feeling of everything about the glass of water. I'm doing my grammar, my who, what, where, and when about the glass. Okay. Now I understand. I have an understanding. I've done my research on that glass. I can put that glass down on the table and not become that glass or that idea. I don't have to believe to it and hold to it and defend it with my life like a religion or whatever. I'm picking it up, I'm studying it, I'm understanding it, and then I put it down. And then when somebody else wants to come to me and discuss that, then I can explain what I learned about that glass with proper rhetoric, without emotional attachment or without having put my logic first. Oh, well, see, logic first would be, well, it's this opaque thing that fell from space, and I think aliens created it. Right. So, it's like, that would be someone who puts their logic first. Whatever idea that they came up with would be the correct answer. It wouldn't matter. So there's no truth. Truth doesn't matter. Who does that behoove that truth doesn't matter?
The elite.
Does that? Yeah, does that work in your favor if you don't care about truth? If you just go around positive thinking and not caring about truth, does that really behoove you? You know, in my opinion, I don't think it does.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
It's true, and then you end up in a situation too where you can where things can be, and here's where it ends up in almost like the philosophical corner area as well. You can also prove and disprove a lot of things. You can with certain things claim it is or it isn't, right? In a certain set, you can say through quantum physics, I can prove that it's not really there. You know, from the Matrix point of view, that this is.
Well, that's very interesting that you brought quantum physics up. In fact, and proof. The idea of logic is, again, the art of non-contradictory identification. So if you still have a contradiction between you and another person's opinion, what does that mean to you? That should tell you, aha, we haven't done enough research yet. We're not on the same page. Or if you've done the research and you know the truth and you know that you can substantiate your claim and you can write a book about it and show point by point by point that this is what really happens, and you still leave yourself open to, incoming data in case there's something you forgot, that's still a possibility. But see, quantum physics comes again from contradictions, from Kantian philosophy. And I recently interviewed David Harriman on my show, who is from the Ayn Rand Institute, so he's got a lot of haters out there, no doubt. But I highly recommend people go and listen to his talk, because he talks about this idea of quantum physics and allowing 11 or 12 contradictions to exist at once. That means that you can never know anything. You might as well just turn off the lights and give it a rest permanently, right? There's no truth in the world. Anything can be right or wrong, true, false, whatever at any given moment. But I think Harriman does an excellent job in his lecture, The Philosophic Corruption of Physics, and then and his book, which I'm forgetting the name of right now, just a second. His book is called The Logical Leap, and I think his book is very excellent, and he really gives a lot of examples. And in fact, what he shows is that through induction, this is how the laws of physics were created that run our computers today and launch our rockets and turn on our lights and all of those things. Those were created via the laws of physics, which were created via induction. And so those things wouldn't have been possible if quantum physics is real, and they still haven't proved quantum physics. Quantum physics is still a theory. There are certain aspects of quantum physics that are true and can work, but the thing as a whole is not proved. M theory is not proved. So, it's still a theory, and if you compare Harriman's work to the field of quantum physics, it raises some very interesting questions that the entire field of quantum physics is based off of irrationality.
Interesting. Because in one regard, I feel that certain of these, the new scientific fields are beneficial to certain aspects of reality. You come into an area of, there's moral objectivism, of course, things like this, that there is, but there's still philosophical ideas. It's like, when you mention again, if it's channeled information, if you will, it's you're in the realm of someone says, well, prove it. Well, you disprove it then. You see what I mean?
But then it's going nowhere. Again, it's arguing the arbitraries. You see, what you have to remember is that there's something called the onus of proof. Whoever is presenting an idea, the onus of proof falls on them to support that idea. If I say that there is a green fairy sitting over in the corner and the guy next to me says, prove it, it's on me to prove it, period. And it just because a channeler says blah, 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 that doesn't mean anything. The onus of proof always falls on that person to substantiate their claim. And even if they've channeled that information, again, they go back to who, what, where, and when. They get that data, and then they can substantiate that claim properly. Okay.
I think as well, Jan, unless there's more you want to mention about that, but I want to ask you about the words, the idea of using the right words as well, even vocabulary, using the terms that everybody is familiar with. This is another problem.
Absolutely. We'll see. That's exactly what you have to do when you go out and you're doing your grammar. The grammar aspect of the Trivium deals with those words, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
And then logic is the art of non-contradictory identification. Correct.
Right.
So when you are listening to someone talk and you say, okay, well, I understand this word to mean X. What do you understand it to mean? And then the other person says, well, I understand it to mean Y. And then you can both say, okay, well, why don't we use this other term B instead of X or Y that we can both agree on? Or let's agree to use my definition or your definition in this specific instance. Okay, so that way what you're doing is you're getting on the same page. You're removing the contradictions, and that's what literally getting on the same page means. Okay, when you have to, when you're talking about a subject, both people have to get on the same page. If I'm studying a book and I'm on page 190 and you're on page 30 and you start, and I start trying to explain to you what's on page 90 and you start arguing with me that I'm wrong based on what you said on page 30, well, that's a pretty stupid thing to argue about. Why not get caught up and get to page 30 and then we'll discuss it?
Yeah, right? Absolutely. That's right. And we are, people overall are not on the same page, and that is why we're in a rut. There are many of the problems that we're dealing with. So but the other point, go ahead, John.
I was just going to say that continuously goes back to people putting their logic before their grammar, before their research. They're coming to conclusions before asking who, what, where, and when. Okay, so if they always go back and check that and get on the same page. Oh, what page were you on? Oh, you're on page 30. I'm on page 190. All right, well, let's wait until we're both finished with the book, and then we'll talk about it then so that we're on the same page. Do you understand what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yep, absolutely.
And so that way you're not talking about nonsense and a bunch of noise because you're not on the same page. You're not looking at the same research or the same grammar yet. And so once you're on the same page, if I go out and I'm looking at a specific number of things, I should be able to come to the exact same conclusion as you. You can have, you get these knuckleheads that'll bring up this Kantian philosophy. Well, how do I know white is white? Or how do I know 2 is 2? Okay, well, or how do I know this is real? How do I know that you're real? Well, if I hit you in the face, you're going to feel it, right? We can both agree during this conversation that this color right here is white, that color right there is black. After this conversation, if you want to go back and continue to thinking white is purple and 1 + 1 is 3, then you're more than welcome to do that. But in this conversation, everyone accepts 1 + 1 = 2, and everyone accepts white is white. You can go on with your irrationalist ideas in circles all day long. I'm not going to play that game. Go have fun doing that if that's what you want to do. Okay.
Jan, have you noticed that there are any areas where it becomes more gray, where it's more difficult to pin it down and the certainty kind of falls out the window a little bit?
Well, not really, because there's all aspects. I mean, there is such a thing as a fallacy, where you have to, where let's say you're listening to someone and you're saying, oh, well, that's a fallacy, that's a fallacy, that's a fallacy. That person's likely full of crap. But you should recognize that there is such a thing as a fallacy and say, well, I'm going to suppose that this person is full of crap, but I'm going to verify that very quickly. Let's say, you're living in a small village someplace, right? And there's another village on the other side of the hill, and you guys are always fighting. And somebody comes running from the other side of the hill in a pant, and he says, appeal to fear. Somebody's coming right now. They're going to come and kill us all, and you got to help, man. And they use all these appeal to fear, appeal to emotion, all of these different things that you would normally discount as fallacies, right? Mm. But the grammar aspect of it tells you to go back down, check your who, what, where, when, and why. which means, or who, what, where, and when, which means that you go over to the hill, you stick your head up over the top of it, and you look over, and you go, holy crap, there is another army. They're actually coming, right? So this is how that always works. So, again, it's a systematic method. It's, if you think of it in a wheel or in a corkscrew, especially the corkscrew, because the corkscrew enables you to imagine the idea that you're digging down further to get more information and coming back up, right? But it's still rotating around in a circle, but you're going down another level. You may come to a conclusion, like I was saying earlier, the conclusions are A or B. Well, that means that you need to dig down another level, and you keep digging down until you reach that bottom level. And, once you reach that bottom level, you still allow yourself through this system for more information to come in at any time. But you can say, well, I've come to this conclusion based on all of the available data at this time. There is somebody coming over the damn hill right now, right? And so, if people do this, if people check, Snopes.com or whatever before they send out chain emails, if people check and verify things that they get on a whim during a channeling thing or whatever, and they understand that the onus of proof is on them to substantiate their claims, then things work a lot better for all of us. Now, that's not to discount the spiritual world. Me being an ethnobotanist and having written books on that and having experienced entheogens myself, I know that, in my opinion, I've had many telepathy experiences and things. So I do think that, based on the information from my five senses, that there is more out there than is described by our language. But what we have to realize is that grammar, logic, and rhetoric only deals with the language that we are able to use, and anything that falls outside of that language is still unable to be identified. So we have to be aware that there might be things, new discoveries or whatever, that, new terms created for new discoveries that were formerly outside of our realm of awareness.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, just because, some objectivists, especially from Ayn Rand, who are hardcore atheists, will state, well, anything out there is impossible. But I've experienced too many things myself in these studies to completely dismiss that sort of thing. And I think that, being that logic and the Trivium only deals with language, that we still have to be aware of whatever, of potentials that are outside of that language, but we still need to do whatever we can to verify information and ideas before we spread them to others.
Right. I definitely understand the point of view that you're coming from, Jan. This is a method of trying to get to the truth, and at the same time, there is a recognition that we don't know everything. We don't have all the instrumentation to measure all the variables in the universe, and we can't always trust that science have all the answers. There's a number of things that are.
Well, see, science is always looking at the available. Well, the idea of science is to look at the available evidence, and then always be looking for new evidence that might change that, right?
Yeah.
And so that's the proper scientific method. If somebody's holding on to a single idea, they're not. That's putting logic before grammar again. That is not the scientific method. And interestingly, the scientific method and many aspects of it come from the Kabbalah. So, that's another interesting tidbit that I won't go into today, but people can listen to podcast number 51 on my Gnostic Media website with Gino Denning, and that will explain that. But we should go into a few more of these logical fallacies here, at least a couple of them. Another one that the post hoc fallacy. A occurs before B, therefore A is the cause of B, and this is a very common one in the New Age movement as well. It's like a black cat crosses my path tonight. Tomorrow, I trip at the shopping mall and I break my toe while I'm text messaging my friend. Never mind that I wasn't watching where I was going. There was a crack in the sidewalk and I was text messaging. It was the black cat that crossed my path the night before that caused it all. Right. So this would be a post hoc fallacy. The red herring fallacy is another very, very common one. And the red herring fallacy, it's you ask a politician a question, and instead of answering that question directly, they go off on a talk. They start telling, when I was a little boy and all of this and blah, 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 blah. And what they're doing is they're derailing the conversation. And this comes from the old fox hunt days when you would train a hound to go after the fox. When the hound was about ready, about trained, and you wanted to test the hound's hunting ability, what you would do is you would release the fox, and then you would set the hand out to go catch the fox, and then what you would do is you would run a fish across the trail of the fox and try and get the hound to follow the smell of the fish rather than the fox. And so this is where we get the red herring fallacy. You're just diverting attention to a completely different topic, and you see if you can get the person to follow you there. Politicians use that one very effectively. Another one is the straw man argument. And a corporation is a straw man argument, in fact. Person A has position X. Person B presents position Y, which is a distorted version of position X. And then person B attacks his own position Y, pretending that it was the same as position X. And then therefore, position X is somehow flawed or incorrect because this guy misrepresented your argument in the first place and set up this straw man, this scarecrow guy that looks like a man but isn't really, a corporation but isn't really a man, sets up this false idea and then attacks that and pretends that it was your argument. And that's, another one that's just very common. But I also recommend people learn the Latin names of the fallacies as well, because that will help tremendously in understanding where they came from and words around them, etc. And again, by learning the logical fallacies, people learn explicit knowledge rather than implicit of when somebody's lying to you. Oh, another one I should say is the slippery slope fallacy. That's very common. If we legalize marijuana, everyone will be shooting heroin in the streets tomorrow, right? It's just, there's no, one doesn't equal the other. Or if we don't go after Osama bin Laden, we'll have terrorists everywhere, even though, the CIA is committing terrorist acts all over the world on a daily basis. I read an article yesterday or day before that the CIA has 70 or 80 covert actions going on in different countries around the world every single day.
Yeah.
So, you never know who's being assassinated or what covert war is going on or whatever, and it's all being done right here at home or launched from here at home. Another one that I want to cover very quickly is the middle ground fallacy. Let's say I've done research into a topic, and I know I've gone all the way down. I've done my grammar and everything. I've removed all the contradictions. I know I've got the truth on this specific topic. Okay. And I present this specific point, and a lot of people get upset about it, and they say, no, that's not the right answer. They put their logic before their grammar. They get upset, and they go out and they create a juxtaposed position that's exactly counter to yours. Okay. Then along comes the politician, right? And he says, hey, you on that side and you on the other side, you guys stop fighting. Let's do something right here in the middle. Okay, well, you've already done your grammar and logic, and you've verified everything that that you presented is true and factual. Okay, and for a fact that the other side put their logic before their grammar. They didn't check anything, and they're reacting emotionally, and their idea is false. Okay, So what happens if you settle for the middle?
Well, you get a false story. You compromise yourself into a position where you get half right.
Well, you've just accepted a lie.
Yeah.
And so nothing gets accomplished. And what you're doing is it simply perpetuates the problem. So this is where, politicians typically make their business, right?
Yeah.
And it's poor thinking. And so these, that's just a rundown of a few of the primary fallacies. But if people go to my triviumeducation.com website, they can click on the links and study more about the fallacies there. And there's also on the video page, there is a video that I did with Dr. Michael LeBosier on the logical fallacies, and that is very good. I recommend people watch the video and listen to the talks, many times over so that they begin to get this stuff. I think I had to listen to them like 10 or 15 times before the logical fallacies really started to click in. And then lastly, before I end the call, Henrik, I do want to mention very quickly the quadrivium, which is the second aspect of the 7 liberal arts, the first being, as I said, the trivium. But the quadrivium is based on arithmetic or mathematics, and then geometry is second, music or harmonic theory is third, and then astronomy is fourth, or you could actually say that's fourth, fifth, sixth, and seventh, since it's the 7 liberal arts. But the quadrivium pertains to matter and quantity, the advanced 4. And mathematics is number in itself, a pure abstraction outside of space and time. And then geometry is number in space. And then music or harmonic theory is number in time. And then astronomy is number in space and time. And again, just like the trivium, these have to be taught in order. You need to know math before you study geometry. You need to know geometry before, like what they do in the United States, what they did to me, which screwed me up, was they taught me math and then they taught me algebra before geometry. And you have to have the proper order so that you have a foundation and understanding of how these things were derived historically. And then this helps your own mind build upon how the ancients built upon this very knowledge themselves. So I just wanted to add that very quickly about the quadrivium so that we don't leave your audience hanging. So that way they at least have a little bit on it there.
Very interesting indeed, Jan. And as we begin to round things up here for this time, we definitely want to give out some websites again here. Gnosticmedia.com, that's your main one.
Why don't we spell that for everyone? That's GNOSTIC media.com. And then the triviumeducation.com website, that's TRIVIUM education.com. Excuse me. And people may also want to check out my another website that I run called popupfallacies.com.
Pop-up fallacy, and that is some of the examples, I guess, of some of the things that we've been running through here. Then real-time, examples. Yeah.
And let me explain, like, for instance, what I did the last pop-up fallacy video I did, and it's based off of the old concept of the, I don't know if you have VH1 in Sweden. I know you guys have MTV in Europe, but
unfortunately we do. Yes.
Yes. I had MTV when I lived in Europe, but VH1 is this other channel that's similar to MTV. They used to play music, mostly don't anymore. And they had this thing called pop-up videos where they would have these pop-ups during the music video making fun of the musicians and making different statements about the bands and stuff like that, right? So what I did is I took that same idea and started using that for fallacies, pop-up fallacies. So the last video I did was Obama's "The Death of Osama bin Laden" speech from May 1st. And it's a 9-minute and 48-second talk. And in that talk, Obama makes 86 lies, I believe. So it works out to, a fallacy is a lie. So we call it a lie per minute rating. So he's got a lie per minute rating of 9.5 lies per minute. And
that's pretty good. Pretty good.
Yeah, that's pretty damn good. So when you go through, you can see how Obama is spinning all of the rhetoric to lie and manipulate you, right?
Yeah.
To lie to you and manipulate you. So, it's the idea with the pop-up fallacies, and people who are interested, there's a link on the left. They can download the pop-up fallacy video toolkit to make their own pop-up fallacies, and they can submit it to us and we'll post them up. But while you're doing your own pop-up fallacy videos, it helps you very much to learn the fallacies as you learn to go through and spot them. So, it's a handy tool to learn them, and both in creating the videos and to get people familiar with how politicians and these types use the false rhetoric against you.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for your time here today, Jan. Very interesting hearing about the trivium. I think there's a lot to learn, obviously, for many people in the conspiracy or alternative movement. A deduction, a method of sorts to hopefully then, Jan, get closer to the truth. A concept and even a word at this point that has become very charged and kind of thrown around, and it gets injected into all kinds of things, and then people are just supposed to take it at face value because it's the truth now, you know. So I'm all with you on the page of try to get closer to the truth, and then as we talked about, Jan, there's always areas